Hi, welcome to my Parsha Shir. Today's Shir is on Parshas Va'eschanan, and I want to tackle a question that has puzzled and vexed Torah commentaries for centuries. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu repeat the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments, in this week's Parsha? We already had them back in Parshas Yisro in Sefer Shmos. Why do we need them again? Now, it's true the 10 Commandments in Va'eschanan are not a word-for-word repetition of the version in Yisro. Many of the commentaries actually focus on these differences. Some, like the Ibn Ezra, even suggest that the differences are the key, that Moshe is adding new details and nuances in this second version. But that's not the direction I want to go in today. Instead, I want to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Sefer Dvarim is full of repetition, laws, narratives, and lessons we've heard before. The 10 Commandments are simply the most obvious and striking example. But why is repetition necessary? What does it accomplish? That's the question that I want to explore today. And as we'll see, the answer to this question is not only the key to understanding Parshas Va'eschanan or Sefer Dvarim, it's the key to understanding how Jewish learning and Jewish life itself actually works. Let's begin with an analogy from the world of sport. Early in his career, Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, was known for his incredible skill. He was fast, he was explosive, and he could score at will. But there was one flaw: his jump shot. Defenders knew that if they could keep him out of the paint, his outside shot was unreliable. So what did Jordan do? He went to the gym every single day and he practiced, not once, not twice, 500 jump shots a day, over and over. Same motion, same shot, same arc, hour after hour. That's how he turned raw talent into automatic precision. He later said about it, "You can practice shooting 8 hours a day, but if your technique is wrong, then all you become is very good at shooting the wrong way. Get the fundamentals down and the level of everything you do will rise." Now, I'm not suggesting Michael Jordan was actually aware of this, what I'm about to say, but that quote isn't just basketball wisdom, it's Torah wisdom. And in Parshas Va'eschanan, Moshe Rabbeinu shows us why. The central passage of Parshas Va'eschanan is Moshe repeating the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. Every commentary on the Torah is puzzled by this. We've heard the 10 Commandments before. They were already given in Parshas Yisro, as I've already said. Why repeat what everyone already knows? Why do you do it? Before we jump into the broader concept of repetition in the Torah, let's look at how the Mefarshim themselves deal with the second appearance of the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments, in Parshas Va'eschanan. Rashi, in his commentary on Shema Yisrael, which isn't very far away from the Aseres HaDibros, explains that Shema doesn't just mean to hear something once. The word Shema implies ongoing engagement, listening, reviewing, repeating, until it becomes ingrained. In other words, Torah isn't meant to be heard once and then filed away. It's supposed to be lived with, revisited, and reinforced until it becomes second nature. The Rambam adds another layer. He focuses on the differences between the version of the Aseres HaDibros in Parshas Yisro and the version here in Va'eschanan. Like Zocher, remember, in the Shmos version, versus Shamar, observe, in the Dvarim version for the mitzvah of Shabbos. According to the Rambam, these words are not contradictions. Chazal famously say, Zocher v'Shamar b'dibur echad, that they were uttered in a single divine utterance, whatever that means. It requires further unpacking. I'm not going to do that now. But then, why not include both in both places? Why not say Zocher v'Shamar? The answer is that each repetition reveals something new. At Mount Sinai, the people heard Zocher, the call to remember when it comes to the mitzvah of Shabbos. But in Va'eschanan, Moshe gives them Shamar, the instruction to guard, to protect, to observe Shabbos in the context of their imminent life in Eretz Yisrael. Every review of Torah uncovers another dimension. Nothing is ever simply restated. It is deepened and honed. With each repetition comes a new chiddush, and this is exactly the point that the Sfas Emes develops in his own learning. The The Sfas Emes famously began his commentary on each parsha with the same medrash year after year, and then proceeded to mine that medrash for new insights. Because when you revisit Torah, it's not actually repetition, because you're always going to uncover something new. Every time you return to it, a new light emerges. That is why Moshe repeats the Aseret HaDibros, not because the people didn't hear them the first time, or since then they probably did, but because only through repetition could they grasp the next layer. That's his message. And Rav Hirsch gives us the educational principle that ties it all together. He writes that Sefer Dvarim is Moshe's way of revoicing the Torah for a new generation. The essence is unchanged, but the emphasis shifts. And in that shift, deeper truths are revealed. Torah is not static. It's very dynamic. It has a fresh take for every generation, and it speaks more profoundly every time we come back to it. The Rambam encoded this principle in the very name of his halachic masterpiece, Mishneh Torah. Dvarim is also called Mishneh Torah. It literally means repetition of the Torah. That's why it's the alternative name for Sefer Dvarim. In his introduction, the Rambam explains that his goal was to create a work that would bring together the entire Torah Shebaal Peh in one place, so that after a person has read the Torah Shebichtav, they could turn to the Mishneh Torah and know everything they need to know. In other words, he was providing a clear, organized system that could be studied and reviewed constantly, and was in and of itself a review of the Torah, until it became second nature. The Rambam wasn't proposing a shortcut. He was giving us a program of disciplined, structured mastery, a way to live in a perpetual state of Mishnah, of reviewing and internalizing Torah. By simplifying the content, the repetition would be a natural way to familiarize yourself with the Torah. Rav Yonas Nebushitz takes this idea of repetition and gives it an urgent, almost frightening edge. In Yaris Devash, he writes that Hilchos Shabbos are so intricate and so filled with countless details that if a person doesn't review them constantly throughout their life, they will inevitably stumble, not because they are careless and not because they are irreligious, but simply because without review, it's impossible to remember everything. This, says Rav Yonason, is the nature of Torah. You cannot learn Hilchos Shabbos once and think you're safe. You have to keep going back. Every time you review Hilchos Shabbos, you remember something you'd forgotten. You catch a nuance you once missed. You sharpen your understanding. If you don't go back to it, even the most well-meaning person will, at some point in their life, be Mechal Shabbos. Not willfully, but through simple neglect of review. For Rabbi Yonas Nebushitz, khazor isn't just about becoming a Talmud Chochem. It's about avoiding disaster. Torah, and especially the practical areas of halacha, must be lived in a state of constant review. The Stipler said something that, in our instant results world sounds almost absurd. Real review doesn't even begin until the fourth time, he says. In our world, once is enough. Twice, mastery. But the Stipler reminds us that true mastery only begins after several repetitions, when the knowledge begins to fuse with who you are. And if you think repetition is just about doing something a few times more than 4 times, Chazal give us a story that pushes the whole idea of repetition to an entirely different level. In Eruvin, Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara tells us about Rabbi Preda and one of his students. This student, we don't know his name, he had a hard time learning. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't even distracted. He just couldn't grasp the material quickly. But Rabbi Preda refused to give up on him. Every time he taught the student a halacha or a sugya, he would go over it again and again, no less than 400 times. That's what the Gemara tells us. You hear that? Not 4 times, not 40 times, 400 times. Only then, says the Gemara, would the student finally understand. Now one day, it's a story in the Gemara. Rabbi Preda was teaching the student as usual, and after 400 repetitions, the student still didn't understand. Rabbi Preda was astonished, and he asked him, what happened? The student admitted that when he heard that his teacher was scheduled to be called away for an important matter, he became distracted and couldn't focus. From the moment they told you that you were needed elsewhere, he told Rabbi Preda, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking, any minute now, you'll have to leave. So what did Rabbi Predo do? He sat back down and taught the student the same thing again, another 400 times. And then the student finally understood. The Gemara says that a heavenly voice rang out and declared two possible rewards for Rabbi Predo. He could choose which one he wanted. Either he could, and his entire generation could, merit 400 additional years of life, or he would be guaranteed a portion in the world to come. I guess what? Rabbi Predo, without hesitation, chose the Olam Haba, the world to come. To which heaven responded, the Baskal said, because you chose selflessly, you'll receive both. Now that's a story about khazor, because that is what it means to live the principle that nothing in the Torah becomes yours until you go over it and over it and over it again and again until it becomes part of you. The Gemara in Kiddushin teaches us that the Torah must be learnt with shinun, v'shinantom levanecha, the Pasuk says, which means that Torah must be reviewed and sharpened until it is so familiar that it is ready on your tongue at any time. That's what shinun means. Obviously, Rabbi Dunner adds one of the most famous lines about khazor in all of Chazal. One who reviews his Torah 100 times, says obviously Rabbi Dunner, is not comparable to one who reviews it 101 times. That single extra review, the one that feels unnecessary, the one over and above the 100 mark, is the one that transforms Torah from information into mastery. It's the same as the idea we have of always going the extra mile if you want to be good at anything. Shema is recited twice every day. And the reason for this is built on this same principle. Hashem designed Jewish life around constant, deliberate review and repetition. The mitzvah cycle, the yearly Torah reading, the daily and weekly annual rhythm of mitzvahs and prayers, every part of it is about training the Jewish soul the same way Michael Jordan's endless jump shot drills trained his body. You don't become great by hearing something once. You become great by repeating it and living it until it becomes part of you. Modern psychology has only recently caught up. In the late 19th century, Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered what we now call the spacing effect. The idea that information, if revisited at deliberate intervals, is retained exponentially better than if it's learnt in one burst. His forgetting curve showed how quickly knowledge evaporates without review, but also how dramatically it solidifies in your brain when reinforced over time. Today, this is the foundation of everything from language learning apps like Duolingo to how medical schools train future surgeons and how elite military units drill their soldiers. The science is so clear. Spaced repetition rewires the brain. And yet, this is exactly what Torah built into Jewish life thousands of years ago. We return to the same parsha every year. We say the same Shema every morning and evening. We cycle through the same mitzvos every season. Each cycle isn't a repeat, it's a reinforcement. Neuroscientists now call this long-term potentiation, the process by which neural pathways strengthen through repeated activation. Chazal simply called it shinun, sharpening, because in Torah, the goal isn't simply to learn, it's to become. Hashem didn't want the Aseret HaDibros, the Ten Commandments, to be a memory you once heard at Sinai. He wanted them engraved into your very being. In the same way, Michael Jordan's perfect jump shot was engraved into his muscles. Through deliberate repetition, mitzvahs shift from being external commands to becoming part of who we are. And in that sense, Jewish life is not only a religion, it's a divinely designed program for spiritual rewiring. Rav Dessler takes this idea even further. In Michtav Melio, he writes that when you learn something once, it remains abstract, floating in the mind. But when you return to it again and again, it begins to sink in, engraving itself on your heart until it becomes part of who you are. He explains that every act of repetition shifts what he calls your bechira point to the point at which your free will operates. The first time you do a mitzvah, it might be a struggle, but do it again and again, and it becomes natural. What once required effort turns instinctive, and your inner battlefield moves to the next challenge. That's why Torah demands constant review, and why Jewish life is structured in cycles. The Shema that we say twice a day, the Parsha we revisit every year, the mitzvos that follow the calendar, all of it is designed to transform us. It is the spiritual version of muscle memory. Ebbinghaus may have uncovered the spacing effect in the lab, but Rav Dessler revealed its purpose in the soul. Through deliberate, repeated engagement, we don't just remember Torah, we become Torah. The Maharal in Netiv Torah, chapter 15, opens a breathtaking window into why repetition is not only necessary but transformative. He explains that the Torah is Ein Sof, it comes from Hashem, who is infinite. When a finite human mind encounters an infinite text, it can never fully grasp it in one pass, or in 10 passes, or even 100 passes. Each review is not simply returning to the same words, it is climbing a spiral staircase. You pass the same point again and again, but each time you're on a higher level, seeing it from a new spiritual perspective. This is why, the Maharal says, we never grow tired of Torah in the way we might with any other book. Once you read a novel, it offers no surprises if you read it a second time. But when you engage with Torah, you can read the same parsha every year, study the same sugya over decades, and each time you'll find something that was invisible before. It's not because the Torah has changed, it's because you've changed. Your previous learning has elevated you, so now you stand at a higher point on the spiral. Repetition in Torah isn't a static review, it's an ever-ascending dynamic movement that mirrors the infinity of the divine wisdom from which it flows. The Medrash Tanchuma in Tazria offers a vivid metaphor that brings this idea to life. Just as a hammer strikes a rock and sends sparks flying in every direction, so too every word of Torah can explode into countless new insights. Each time you return to a posuk or a sugya, you strike it again. The text doesn't break, it reveals. The first blow releases one spark, the second another, and eventually a dazzling cascade of light emerges. Torah literally sparkles, which is why repetition is not monotonous, it's generative. You aren't looping over old ground, you're uncovering sparks that were hidden, waiting for that next strike. According to what we know about him, the Chasam Sofer, Rav Moshe Sofer, embodied this principle in his own learning. His students recorded that he would sometimes repeat a single sugya or halachic topic dozens of times. He explained to them that each review was not simply going over the same material, but entering it at a different depth, or from a different angle, uncovering layers he had never noticed before. Once, when he was asked why he kept returning to a familiar Gemara, he reportedly said, "Do you think the Torah is exhausted after one reading? Every time I return, I find an entirely new Torah." For the Chasam Sofer, repetition was not a safety net for forgetfulness. It was the forge in which true understanding was hammered out. And this wasn't merely his personal habit, it was his educational philosophy. He would tell his students that if they ever felt bored reviewing a sugya, do you know why it was happening? It was because they were only circling on the surface. If they struck it harder again and again, the sparks would fly off it. Chaim of Volozhin in Nefesh HaChaim takes the idea of repetition to an entirely different level. He writes that every single word of Torah study creates a spiritual imprint. Even if you don't remember what you learned, even if the details seem to slip away, nothing is actually lost. And let's face it, we don't remember every word, and sometimes we forget everything. So what's the point? I'll tell you the point. Each review, each repetition, strengthens the soul's bond with Torah and sends ripples through the upper worlds into Shamayim. According to Rav Chaim of Volozhin, Torah study is not only an intellectual act, it's a metaphysical act. When you go over a sugya for the 10th or the 100th time, you're not merely reinforcing information. You are engraving Torah onto the fabric of your neshama, of your soul. Every word leaves an indelible mark, and those marks accumulate until they transform you. This is why Moshe Rabbeinu and Chazal place such an emphasis on constant review. It's not about rote memory. It's about the invisible architecture of the soul. Every Shnai Mikra, every Daf, every Pasuk of Shema, even if it feels repetitive, is building unseen worlds and binding you closer to Hashem in ways you can't measure. The Chazon Ish in Emunah Ubitochen offers a profoundly different perspective on why Torah demands repetition. He says that true Torah knowledge isn't really about information at all. It's about hergish, a deep cultivated sensitivity. A person who studies Torah superficially may know the facts, but they don't yet feel the Torah. That kind of instinctive connection, the ability to sense what is right and what is wrong, almost without thinking, can only be formed through what he calls 1,000 small touches. Constant, repeated contact with Torah until it seeps into your very being. This is the hidden meaning behind the teaching in Obviously Rabbi Nosson. One who reviews his Torah 100 times is not comparable to one who reviews it 101 times. That one extra review is not about the information, it's about the transformation. At 100, you still know the Torah. At 101, the Torah begins to know you. Your reflexes change, your hergish sharpens. You don't merely have Torah in your mind, you start to live it instinctively. And then the 102nd time, and then the 103rd time, the sky is the limit, or should I say, the heavens are the limit, and the heavens are unlimited. And Rav Shach once explained why he would sometimes spend days reviewing a single passage of Gemara instead of moving forward. He said, when I get to Shamayim, they won't ask me how many Masechtas I learned. They'll ask me, how much Torah became you? Torah is not about information, it's about transformation. And transformation happens only through Chazorah and more Chazorah. The Baal Shem Tov, quoted in Degel Machane Ephraim, radically reframes what it means to review Torah. He taught that every single time you learn a Pasuk, or a Mishneh, or a Sugya that you already know, you're not just revisiting old information, you are hearing Hashem speak again. This means that Torah study is not simply the act of remembering what was once given at Sinai. It is a living, ongoing revelation. Even if you're reviewing the same pasuk you first learned as a child, in that moment Hashem is speaking that pasuk to you, here and now, in the exact circumstances of your life as it is now. Your learning becomes a personal encounter with the divine word, uniquely tailored to this moment in your spiritual journey. This transforms repetition from a dry academic exercise into an act of intimacy. Every review is a new meeting, a new conversation. What you learned at age 10 is not what you'll hear at age 30, because you are no longer the same person. The words haven't changed, but you have. And so the Torah reveals new layers each time you return to it. In this way, the Baal Shem Tov turns repetition into renewal. You're not going in circles, you're spiraling upward. Like the Maharal said, encountering the same words at higher and deeper levels each time, closer to their source. One of the most fascinating case studies in the history of neuroscience involves a man known for decades only by his initials HM. His name actually was Henry Molaison, and he suffered from severe epilepsy. Now, in 1953, at the age of 27, HM underwent experimental brain surgery to remove portions of his medial temporal lobes, including most of his hippocampus. The surgery stopped his seizures, but it came with an extraordinary and devastating side effect. From that day on, HM lost the ability to form new long-term memories. He could have a conversation with someone, then leave the room, and 5 minutes later meet the same person as if it was the very first time he'd ever met them. But out of this tragedy emerged one of the most remarkable insights into how human memory works. In the late 1950s, researchers began testing HM's ability to learn new skills. They gave him a task known as mirror tracing, in which someone is asked to trace the outline of a star while only seeing their hand's reflection in a mirror. It's a frustrating and counterintuitive exercise. Not surprisingly, on his first attempt, HM was clumsy and slow. But when they brought him back the next day, something incredible happened. Even though HM had no memory of ever seeing the task before, he performed it more smoothly. The third day, he was even better. He never remembered doing it before, but his brain had clearly retained what his conscious mind could not. This case became one of the most famous demonstrations in cognitive science that repetition builds deep automatic skill, even independent of conscious memory. Motor learning, procedural knowledge, and what we might call second nature habits are stored in parts of the brain untouched by amnesia. Repetition literally rewires us. For Torah, this is a powerful analogy. Even when we think we've forgotten, every review session leaves a trace, and over time, those traces add up until the knowledge lives in us, deeper than memory. There's a second, very different case study from the field of education, which proves the same point. A group of researchers redesigned an advanced undergraduate physics course, replacing most traditional lectures with what they called deliberate practice. Instead of passively listening to an instructor, students spent class time repeatedly solving carefully selected problems, receiving immediate feedback, and then trying again. The result of this was absolutely incredible. Exam performance on the most challenging questions improved by 15%. And this improvement held strong even when the course was later taught by a different professor. In another controlled study with clinical medical students, repetitive procedural drills combined with periodic feedback produced dramatically stronger skill acquisition than standard lecture and practice models. Both of these studies point in the same direction, teaching us that mastery of anything is not built on hearing about it once or on high IQ. It's built through repetition. HM's brain, stripped of memory, still became fluent through repetition. Physics students, forced to practice instead of merely listening, became measurably smarter. The idea that we need to constantly review the Torah, daily Shema, weekly Shabbos readings, regular mitzvos that need to be observed, reflects this exact same truth. If you want something to live inside you, you must repeat it until it does. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." The journalist Malcolm Gladwell puts it this way: practice isn't the thing you do once, you're good. It's the thing you do that makes you good. And Rav Dessler expressed the very same idea in Torah language. Kol ma she'odam oseh pa'amim rabos na'aseh teva lo. Whatever a person does many times becomes his nature. In other words, whether you are talking about philosophy, modern psychology, or Musar, the principle is the same. Mastery of skills, of character, or of Torah doesn't come from inspiration. It comes from repetition, which is why Moshe Rabbeinu repeated the Aseres HaDibros in Vayischanon and so many other parts of the Torah throughout Sefer Dvarim, not because the people didn't know them, and not because they couldn't go back and read them in the earlier books of the Torah, but because only through repetition could those words become their identity. That's why the Sfas Emes began his drosha every single year with the same line from the Medrash. It's why Rav Dessler told us that repetition creates second nature. It's why the Rambam called his masterpiece Mishneh Torah. It's why Rav Yonas Neighborshitz warned that unless a person constantly reviews Hilchos Shabbos, he will inevitably stumble. And it's why the Stipler said that real review doesn't even begin until you've gone over it 4 times. Moshe wasn't wasting words. He was handing us the most practical key to spiritual greatness. Repetition doesn't just teach you Torah. Repetition turns you into Torah. If Michael Jordan needed 500 jump shots a day to become Michael Jordan, how many repetitions do we need to become who we are meant to be? I'll leave you with that question, and that's it for today's share. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you. Thank you.